Okay. Are you ready to get started, Dr. Desai?
I am.
Okay. So to start, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that's here right now. Thank you for joining us for our webinar tonight, Residency Real Talk with Dr. Desai. If you don't already know, my name is Alyssa Harlow, and I am the Director of Marketing here at MD2B Connect. We're very excited to have you guys tonight as we're kind of having a different format for tonight's webinar. So tonight we'll be answering your questions that you guys have submitted over the past week. And we're really excited to get to that. So we're going to be doing a Q&A style. I did want to mention that we do encourage you all to make comments or ask follow-up questions in the chat. So please feel free, if you have any questions throughout the webinar at any time, to submit those in the chat, and we will do our best to get to them as quickly as possible. Additionally, if we do have time at the end, we may answer some follow-up questions that are in the chat. So I just wanted to put that out there. Additionally, I did want to mention our whole staff. Obviously, I'm Melissa Harlow. I am the Director of Marketing here. Additionally, we have Manish Sadness, who is the co-founder of MD2B Connect. We also have Ryan Downing, who is the VP of Editorial Services here at MD2B Connect. And additionally, we have Dan Morris, who is the Director of Client Services. And also we have Dr. Samir Desai. So with that further ado, I will hand it off to Dr. Desai, who will get us started.
Okay, thank you so much, Alyssa. I am excited to be here with all of you today for another webinar, our Residency Real Talk. And this is something that I look forward to every month. In previous episodes, we have talked about different things like program signaling and the personal statement. You have access to those previous webinar episodes on our YouTube channel. So don't forget to subscribe to MD2B Connect, where you can access that up-to-date information from those previous webinars. And so today we're going to be talking about your questions. I know that we're here in August, right around the corner is September. There's a lot going on right now. A lot of you have questions pertaining to different issues related to matching into residency. So I wanted to devote tonight's session to covering as many questions as we can. I wanted to welcome all of you, but also welcome those of you who are first-time attendees. So if you're rotating with us and this is your first time with our webinar, thank you for joining. And remember, this webinar is just one way we keep you up to date with the key information you need to match. There's a lot of other things that we do. All of you have or will be receiving soon two very important resources, two books, one of which is called Success on the Wards, and the other book is called The Successful Match. Now, those are two very, very detailed resources. Success on the Wards helps you perform at a high level in US clinical rotations, and The Successful Match is over 600 pages of highly detailed information on everything you ever wanted to know about the residency match. And you must have all heard about that expression, information is power. So at MD2B Connect, we're all about giving you the information you need to make great decisions. And do take a look at those resources. They will answer a lot of your questions. But also don't forget about other complementary resources we have besides our books and our webinar. Remember, we have two websites you are familiar with, md2bconnect.com, where you can access our list of IMG-friendly programs by state. I know a lot of you are doing some heavy research right now, trying to determine what is that list of programs you're going to send your applications to. And also on our sister website, thesuccessfulmatch.com, there are additional resources, including Q&As with program directors that will give you additional insight into what programs are looking for, as well as an extensive blog covering different aspects of the residency application process, everything from the ARAS application to personal statements, and of course, to interviews and everything in between. We also have podcasts. So our Success in Medicine podcast, which is a seasonal podcast, is available at both websites. But there you can also access very, very key information that's going to help you get closer and closer to your match. Now, I know I've talked to many of you one-on-one. For those of you who I haven't yet spoken to. I'm really looking forward to contacting you here in the near future. And that's an opportunity for us to dive deep into your particular situation because I want you to, have the information you need that's specific to you so we can get again you closer and closer to your goals. So I look forward to talking with all of you very, very soon. So without further ado, we're going to get into our questions. Alyssa, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. So for our first question of the night, the question is, do you have any tips for the supplemental ERAS application?
Yeah, so I know from talking to a lot of you that that supplemental ERAS application is starting to be front and center in your minds, and it's understandably so. It's an important part of the residency application. And we know from last year's experience, by the way, last year was the first year of the supplemental application, and only 3 specialties participated in it, and those were internal medicine, general surgery, and dermatology. So this year we have expanded that now to 16 specialties, and there are 3 major parts to the supplemental application. The first part are your experiences, where you can write about your experiences that you find most meaningful or impactful. The second part is your geographic preferences. And the third is your program signaling. Now, in our June webinar, we devoted the entire hour essentially to program signaling. So you want to access that episode again on our MD2B Connect YouTube channel. So what are some tips that I can give you about the ARAS supplemental application? So first thing to note is that it is optional. However, it is in your best interests to complete the application. Why do I say that? Because we know from data on how it was used last year that many programs utilized it heavily in the residency selection process. So I would encourage all of you to complete it. Now, which of the sections are most important? The 2 sections that carry the most weight are your geographic preferences section and your program signaling. That's not to say that the experience section doesn't matter. There's just greater variability in how programs use the experience section. Some programs weight it heavily, others may hardly look at it at all. But of course, since we don't know how each individual program, how they will use our supplemental application, every section of that application matters. And so when you're looking at that, you have a number of weeks to complete that supplemental application. We have until mid-September to do it, but there is that deadline. So we don't want to save all of our work for this until the last minute because there's quite a bit to do. An important tip is that you want to complete your ARAS application before you tackle the supplemental, because the application for your supplemental is easier to do when you've had chance to complete the main ARAS application. Now remember, in the experience section of the supplemental, you are writing about your meaningful experiences and those that are impactful to you. And you're trying to provide what we call complementary information to what's in your main ARAS residency application. And what programs are really looking for in the essays for the experience section of the supplemental are why you found those experiences meaningful. How did it shape you as a person and as a professional? What qualities did you develop through that experience, and how will it make you a successful resident? So these are the types of things that you want to reveal about yourself through the experience section of the supplemental. Alyssa, do you want to move on to the next question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for answering that question, Dr. Desai. Next up for our next question is, which parts of the supplemental ERAS application are the most important?
Right. So I spoke a bit about that just a moment ago. So your geographic preferences section and your program signaling section are the most important. If you had to rank the two, program signaling is going to be more important than geographic preferences. Now, with program signaling, this last year was used heavily by programs to gauge your level of interest in their program. Now, you have a limited number of program signals you can send. Depends on the specialty in which you're applying to. It could be as few as 3, could be as many as 30. You want to think very deeply where to send those signals. You want to make sure that the signals you're sending are, for the most part, and there's going to be some exceptions to this based on your individual situations, but the signals that you're sending are places where your profile would be competitive. In other words, there's a good fit between what you have to offer in your profile and what that program is looking for. So that's very, very important to ascertain as you're researching these programs. So make sure that you are taking some time on a daily basis to do your program research so you can make good choices on where to send those signals. Remember, those signals really do make a difference in how they're going to look at you as applicants. In fact, in one survey, uh, half of the program directors from last year, the inaugural year of the supplemental application, indicated that the ERA supplemental helped them to not overlook people. So remember, in this whole process, with so many applications being received by each program, it can be easy to overlook good people. And this program signaling that we have available to us helps you avoid that common problem of being overlooked.
Great. Thank you for that answer. I did also want to mention in the chat that I shared a couple links to our podcast that we have shared in the past about the supplemental ERAS application. So if you have time, I would suggest also checking those out as those are helpful. On to our next question. Is it frowned upon to apply for a preliminary and categorical position in one program?
Okay, so we know that some programs have positions in both categorical and preliminary programs. And so let's first talk a little bit about US students, and then we'll move it over to international medical graduates. So most US students, when they're applying for residency, apply to either preliminary or categorical positions. Those that are applying to preliminary positions need that position essentially to be their first year, their base year for whatever their main specialty is. And so that's typical for US medical students. Now, international medical graduates, we know that our situation is very, very different. Our match rates are lower, of course, than US medical students. And so it's not uncommon for international medical graduates to apply to both preliminary and categorical positions at the same program. I would not say that it's necessarily frowned upon. I would say that it may cause some confusion about your future directions, what your goals are. That may come up. But applying to preliminary and categorical does protect you because you are being considered for several aspects of that program. And so if you, for example, secure a preliminary position at a program, and that might not be what you really want, right? You might have wanted that categorical position. Getting your foot through the door in the form of a preliminary interview might allow you to make that strong impression that you need in order for that program then to consider you for a categorical position. So that has happened. It's not uncommon where once they get to see you in person, they may decide, hey, this is someone that has a lot to offer, and we really should consider them for a categorical position. Now, I will tell you that most programs look at these preliminary positions, especially in internal medicine, and they try to favor people who need those for their base year. Because if you have people who have to fulfill that preliminary year in order to move on to the next phase of their training, if those people go unmatched for their preliminary year, they're not going to be able to continue their training or even start their training. So therefore, they tend to favor people who need that base year. So that's something to keep in mind. Alyssa, next question.
Okay. And I did want to mention real quick that if you had any questions or follow-up questions to any of the topics we're talking about, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will get to them as soon as we can. So on to the next question. It is, once the preliminary year is done, do I have to take part in the match again?
Okay, so if you land a preliminary position and you don't have any training that you secured after that, there are some different things that you can do. So sometimes an opening will occur in your own training program. So wherever you're doing your preliminary year, there may be an opening that occurs, or sometimes a new position is occurred at the PGY2 level. Or if you've just performed so well that they want to keep you, that they find a way to create another position. So there's different ways that positions can become available at your training institution, which would then allow you to just slot in for the available position. You wouldn't have to apply for that position through the match. Now, other situations are going to be that perhaps there isn't an opening in your own program, but there may be openings in other programs. So it's not uncommon for programs to have these openings at various times of the year. Some people will start their first year of residency training and then realize they don't want to do that specialty, or maybe they're unhappy in that program. And there's a number of reasons why things may happen, but vacancies do occur. And when vacancies occur, you could be considered for that open slot. So that's another situation where you don't necessarily have to apply for the match. But many people with preliminary positions will apply for the match, essentially because you have to start the application several months after you start your preliminary year, right? You start your preliminary year in the end of June, early July, and of course the residency application is submitted in September. So a lot of what I'm talking about related to vacancies and all of these other things may not become known or apparent until after you submit the application. So most people with a preliminary year who don't have further training secured will in fact apply for the match for that reason.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. Desai. On to the next question. Our next question is, I want to apply to a fellowship after residency. Are there any characteristics of a program that I should look for that will help me get a fellowship position in the future, such as university community based?
Okay, so the question is asking about what should I look for in a program if I'm interested in doing a fellowship? So one important thing to look at is their fellowship placement data, the statistics. How do they do in terms of residents moving on to fellowship? What percentage of their residents uh, enter fellowship programs? So that's one thing you want to ascertain, but you want to dive deeper into that. You want to get an idea of what people are matching into. So what subspecialties are they doing? So if you're, you know, going after internal medicine, for example, or you're going after pediatrics or obstetrics and gynecology, when you're looking at that graduate outcome data, you want to ask yourself, are people matching in the subspecialty that you currently have an interest in? Now, you might not know for sure what you want to do, but you might have several options that you're considering. And what you can glean from that is how well that program helps people get there. Now, in interpreting that data, one thing that can be hard to determine is how many people are actually going for that subspecialty. So there may be very, very small numbers of people who are interested in a subspecialty, which can affect the way that data is interpreted. Beyond that, you can look at some other characteristics. You want to take a close look at the program faculty, especially in your subspecialty areas of interest. Who are these faculty members? How many of them are there in the department? What is their track record in the field? Have they been practicing in the field for a long time? Do they take part in their national societies? Do they sit on committees? Do they do research? And if they do research, how productive are they? Have they published? Have they presented at conferences? And have their trainees, the residents in their program, published and presented at conferences under their guidance? So this is where you're looking at faculty and trying to determine, what their faculty has been able to accomplish and what kind of mentors there are. So much of getting into fellowship is about the people with whom you work. So that is a very, very big part of this. That's sometimes uh, that research, some of that is easily accessible to us even before we apply and interview. But sometimes the key information comes from when we secure an interview and we get to talk to people during the interview day. So these are some of the things to look for. Another thing that I would say is important is the program director. You really want to get a good feel for how supportive the program director is, because that program director is going to write you a program director letter of recommendation. And when you look at the criteria that are most important to fellowship programs, that letter of recommendation is very, very high on the list. So those are some of the things that you want to factor in. Alyssa, next question.
Yep. Real quick, Dr. Desai, I think we may have lost your video. So
Yes, I noticed that I've lost my video, but hopefully here in a moment that'll come back. It may just be a little internet
yeah, no
speed
worries.
issue.
Right. So we can just move on to the next question since we can still hear you. Hopefully that'll come back on in just a couple seconds or minutes here. So for the next question, we have what makes more sense strategy-wise with regards to supplemental ERAS? Applying to a program that we really want but is pretty competitive versus applying to a program that is more attainable and geographically close. And it seems like your video is back on, so we are all good.
Good, excellent. Yes, so what is a better strategy? Again, to a great extent, this depends on your individual situation. Now, we know that geography is a very important factor to residency applicants when they make their rank list. That's something that programs also know very well. We survey these applicants every year after the match, inquiring about what factors led you to develop your rank list. So geography is always at that top of the list. Since that's the case, geography has become very, very important to residency programs in making decisions on whom to interview, which is why a lot of applicants that are interviewed at programs either live somewhere close to that program, right, in that geographic region, or have in some way, shape, or form demonstrated some ties to that program's geographic region. So geography is a big, big deal to programs, and they're going to factor that in and use every available tool at their disposal through your application to decide, if you're truly somebody who's very interested. And that presents a challenge because there are plenty of applicants out there that aren't geographically restricted or are open to a lot of program possibilities. They may be, looking for what they consider to be the best program, but that presents a challenge because if programs are looking at geography, your ability to show that, that can be something that is factored into their decision making. So as far as, what is the best strategy? Again, it depends on your individual situation, but at the end of the day, what you're all trying to do is you're trying to get to a certain number of interviews. So if you go to the NRMP website and you look at the data, and remember, there's several important documents there, but one is charting outcomes in the match. And there's a charting outcomes in the match for international medical graduates. You can see how people do in terms of matching based on the number of interviews they get. And it's different for every specialty, but if you can get to a certain number, that significantly increases your chance of successful match. So if you have program signals to give, you want to be very strategic with where you signal those programs. Because if you're signaling programs where you're competitive at, that's going to help you get to that number of interviews you need to increase your match success chances.
Thank
Alyssa?
you for that answer, Dr. Desai. Our next question is, how do you know if the residency program is good? I care the most about education and becoming a doctor who has seen a lot of cases and who is an expert in the field, and I'm not sure how to figure out by programs research.
Right, that's a very good question. So the first thing to do is really scour the program's website. You know, the pandemic has been a tough time, and there hasn't been a whole lot of good things that have come, from the pandemic. One is that program websites have become a lot better. Okay? 3 years ago, before the pandemic, and compared to now, our websites for most programs are much, much better. We are giving our applicants far more information, and that's a good thing. It's something that I've been advocating for a long time, and I'm glad to see that we are being more transparent. And so programs are providing information in different ways. So they have many web pages on their program website. They now have videos. They also invite applicants to get to know the program in different ways. For example, you may be able to attend a Q&A with the program leadership. You may be able to attend conferences. Sometimes they have meet and greets with residents. So what I would encourage all of you to do as you're going through these websites is take a look and see how programs are communicating with applicants and utilize all of those means of communications to learn as much as you can about the program. And that'll give you an idea of their educational climate, an idea of their culture, those things that are important to you, and you'll start to glean that from the more data points that you have about that particular program. Beyond that, it can be very, very helpful to talk to people who know something about the program. There's a lot of people out there that would be very open to talking to you. It's just a matter of reaching out to them. And there's no better way to get the nitty gritty from talking to people who are directly in the know.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Dr. Sai. We actually have a follow-up question to that, which is, what are the red flags that we should be looking out for during program research?
Sure. So one red flag that I would consider is the quality of the program's website. So I just got through saying that our program websites are much better than they were 3 years ago. Now, if you're coming across some websites that are sparsely populated with information, there's hardly anything there, you have to ask yourself why the program has not put in the time and effort to provide the information that we need. Why isn't that a priority for them? Now, that's not a perfect gauge of a program's quality, but it should make you wonder why that hasn't been done. So there is that to glean from residency programs, and I would say that that could be a potential area of concern. Other areas of concern have to do with the program's status. So you want to check with the ACGME, and you can do that at the ACGME website, about the program status. When was it that they were last accredited? What is their accreditation status? Are they on probation? And if they are on probation, what's the reason that they are on probation? So that's another metric you can use. Another thing that you can take a look at is their board passage rate. What is that board passage rate? Because at the end of your residency training, you want to take the final steps to become board certified in your specialty. And that is something that is going to be very important for you in your career. So you want to take a look at that. You also want to determine how the people in the program view their program. So by that I mean, of course, the trainees. How do the residents see their program? Do they see their program as supportive and nurturing? Is this a program that has created a culture that's conducive to their residents, growing and developing the foundation that they need? That can be a bit hard to determine from a program website. But again, these other aspects of communication that we talked about can give you more insight into that, as well as any efforts that you take to talk to people. Because when you talk to people, they will tell you, how things are. And that will give you an idea of whether there's any red flag situations. So those are some of the things that I would recommend looking into.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, Dr. Desai. Coming for our next question is, I came across a program stating if you're an IMG, you need to apply through ECFMG office. Do they mean ECFMG certification, or is applying through ECFMG an actual thing?
So what they're referring to is just ECFMG certification and the ECFMG support services that get you ready to be a residency applicant. You're not really applying through the ECFMG. You're getting to a point where you are ECFMG certified, hopefully, before you apply. But if not before you apply, that you've got all the pieces there and you'll be certified, shortly after you apply. That's what programs are looking for.
Okay. Our next question is, when programs offer different tracks, such as hospitalist, primary care, and categorical, do we apply to a specific track or just the program? And later on, we choose the track? And which track to choose if we want to pursue fellowship?
Okay, so some programs have multiple tracks. Now, whether you apply to those tracks right from the start depends on whether the track has a unique NRMP ID number. So there are programs that have separate NRMP ID numbers for their tracks. Now, there are other tracks within residency programs that don't have an NRMP ID number, but are embedded within the program that you can take part in. Some programs like to know of your interest at the time of your interview. Other programs are more flexible and they may have the option of considering you for one of those tracks later on after you match. So it very much is dependent upon the program. And as far as how it affects your fellowship placement, it really depends again on the track. For example, there are some very specialized tracks that build your profile in a certain area. So, for example, Stanford Internal Medicine has a global health track, and that is a very, very structured program which allows you to gain specialized knowledge in global health, but also learn how to be someone who can make contributions in that area. And that, if it intersects with your subspecialty of choice, like let's say you do things in the global health track that builds your profile in the fellowship specialty you're going to apply to later on, certainly that strengthens your profile for fellowship placement. So you have to kind of think about it in that way. But there are some very, very exciting tracks all across the country. And if you have interests in them, that's something to really consider and go after, because it can change the course of your career beyond fellowship placement. Now, keep in mind also that in these tracks, what you do is going to be a bit different, but most of what you do is going to be the same between the tracks. So let's say that you get a position in the primary care track, and maybe 6 months into that primary care track, you realize that you want to subspecialize. Plenty of people have ended up doing that. So there is going to be flexibility to still achieve your goals if you find yourself in one track or another.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Dr. Desai. On to our next question. It is, one program said you will need to get an LOR from a senior faculty member of medicine in replacement of the chairman's LOR. Who would be a senior faculty member in this case?
Right. Without knowing more about that particular program, it's hard to say what they are looking for. So some specialties ask for a chairman's letter. Now, in my experience, chairman's letters are far more important for US medical students than international medical grads. And the reason for that is they have created in all specialties a format for the chairman's letter. And since US medical schools have similar curriculums, it's easier for residency programs to get meaning out of chairman's letters written for US medical students. Contrast that with international medical graduates who come from all over the world, right? Hundreds upon hundreds of different medical schools with many different curriculums, different types of training. It's harder to get the same value and meaning from those chairman's letters. Now, one thing that I've spoken extensively about when I speak at institutions or at residency programs is the need to be more transparent with the chairman's letter, because you hardly see language on these websites about if the chairman's letter is actually required for international medical graduates. It's sort of a blanket statement that either says, we require chairman's letter, or it's not very specific. It's not clear. So because of that, what I often recommend people do is write to the program. It's always okay to write to the program to get clarification. In many cases, when people write to the program, they will find that a lot of programs say, oh, it's okay. If you're an IMG, you don't need a chairman's letter. You can submit another letter in its place. And that's important information to know. Other times they'll tell you, yes, even though you're an IMG, we need a chairman's letter. And since letters written by US physicians carry the most value, if you find out that a program doesn't need a chairman's letter from your home country, then you're far better off submitting a letter written by a US physician. So now getting back to the original question, it's hard for me to say what they mean by a senior physician, because I'm not so sure about the context of this question. But the best thing to do would be just to write to that program and ask for the clarification, and you'll get your answer.
Okay, thank you for your response, Dr. Desai. On to our next question. It is it frowned upon if the applicants reach out to the program director to ask questions? So this kind of segues into what we were just talking about.
Right. So there's nothing wrong with reaching out to the program to ask questions. You can reach out to the program director, you can reach out to the program coordinator. Really, the two of them are attached at the hip. They are working side by side, working in unison at this time of the year. And they will get back to you. Now, they may not get back to you as fast as you would like, because programs are getting hundreds of emails every day. So you may have to be patient, but it's okay to ask questions and you'll get your answer. And that's really going to help you make some important decisions. Now, one word of advice related to reaching out to programs is that every communication you have with programs is an opportunity to make an impression. So you want to be very, very careful in the email that you send. You want to word it properly. You want to double and triple check it, because that is an impression you're making.
Okay. On to our next question. It is, how are the LORs written by non-American physicians taken or weighted by the program?
So the work that you've done in your home country, the training that you've gone through, that education, the rotations you've completed in hospitals, the residencies you've done, those are all very important parts of your background. They have built the foundation that you have today, which you are now supplementing with whatever you're doing in the US. So programs recognize that, programs value that. The problem is they are trying to see how your training and background translates to the US setting. So, as I'm sure all of you have seen, the US setting is very, very different from other parts of the world, just like your country's healthcare system is different from the US. So, if I went to another country, there would be a transition period for me where I would face a number of challenges. And, that would take me some time, some effort, right, to become where I want to be in that particular setting. The same thing is known for people who are coming to the US. So programs recognize that. So they want to see evidence that you have the skills, which you do from your home countries, and that you brought those skills here and you've been able to adapt those skills to provide care for patients in the US context. So that's why they heavily value letters of recommendation written by US physicians. That's not to say there's no value for letters written by physicians in your home country. As we talked about before, there are some programs who want to see a chairman's letter from your medical school. So there is some value, but it is disproportionately weighted to US letters. So your profile is going to be far stronger if most, if not all of your letters are written by US physicians.
Absolutely. Thank you for that response, Dr. Desai. I think that was a great explanation for that question. On to our next question for the night. This was a very popular question. We had it a couple times. So the question is, what do you think about the chance of an IMG with a year of graduation of more than 5 years? We also had a similar question, which was just about IMGs with a higher year of graduation and how that will affect the match this year.
Right. So year of graduation is a factor. And as you're researching programs, you want to pay close attention to any language, any wording on their website that indicates how they look at year of graduation. Now, what I can tell you is that there are some programs who have these strict cutoffs. Now, it's hard to know who has a strict cutoff and who doesn't. And the reason I say that is in 20 plus years of doing this, I have seen all kinds of exceptions made for people who don't make the YOG cutoff. And it just goes to show you that there is flexibility at a lot of programs to consider people who don't necessarily meet all the criteria. But one of the things that you want to take into account is how firmly the wording is on a website. Some programs come out very vehemently, very, very forcefully, and indicate that this is an absolute criteria. And at those programs, it may not behoove you to apply to those programs. But as I mentioned, many programs will make exceptions. Now, they tend to make exceptions when your YOG is a little bit closer to their cutoff. But even having said that, I have seen people with YOGs over 10 years match at places where they have 3-year YOG cutoffs or 5-year YOG cutoffs. And so while it may seem like the program pool that would consider you if you have a YOG over 5 years is smaller, there are exceptions made, which is why every aspect of your application is very, very important. My experience has shown that when your application is compellingly written, that you've strengthened everything you can control, that programs are willing to take a closer look at you, even if you don't meet the YOG, because they see something in you that you have to offer. And you all have lots of things to offer, and you all have different strengths. And those strengths matter to programs. Will it matter to all programs? No, because some are going to be very, very strict, but quite a few are going to have some flexibility in that. And I can tell you story after story of people who have matched that didn't meet the YOG cutoff.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point about the verbiage on the websites because I've definitely seen some programs where it says, something like no more than 5 years, but there will be a different program that says preferred within, the past 5 years of graduation. So I think that's a really good point. That's definitely something that you should take a look into. Additionally, I did want to mention that on our IMG friendly programs on our website, we do offer information from the residency program websites about graduation year cutoff. So I advise you take a look into that if you do have some time. So moving on to our next question, I would like to know about the filter criteria by programs to select candidates for interviews.
Right. So one of the problems that programs face year after year are the large number of applications they receive. Essentially, every year for some time now, they've been breaking records. And so the problem is that when they have record breaking numbers of applications, how can they best review all those applications and make good decisions on the people that they're going to interview? Typical program extends interview invitations to about 15% of their applicants. And so they have a hard time doing that. And as a result, they sometimes will use filters to narrow that very, very large applicant pool into a smaller group that they can take a much closer look at. Now, they can use different criteria, in these filters. They can use step scores, and they have used step scores. For example, in internal medicine, in the past, 70% or so of programs have utilized cutoff scores for your step one. Now, they can use filters based on your main ARAS application, but they can also use filters based on your ARAS supplemental. For example, your geographic preferences that you indicate, or your program signals that you indicate. So they utilize those filters to make things more manageable for them. But as a result, they do make a lot of mistakes. And that is why we, as educators, so I, sit on the residency selection committee at Baylor. I've been a committee member for, 25 years now. When I get together at these conferences and I meet other selection committee members, we talk about how we want to be more holistic in looking at applicants. And we're trying to move it in that direction. And some progress has been made, but we still have quite a ways to go because we need to appreciate all the things that applicants bring as prospective residents, right? It's not just your step scores. You all have done some remarkable things in different areas, whether it's your teaching and how you made an impact in your medical school on other learners. It could be that you've been involved in advocacy and community outreach where you've really made an impact on certain populations. Maybe you're involved in some very exciting research. We need to be able to appreciate all of those things and factor that into our decision making. And we're trying to get closer and closer to a more holistic approach. But filters are still used. It remains to be seen exactly how they're going to be used this year because we're at a transition point where step one obviously has gone pass fail. So we will see. We don't really know how programs will look at that, but the feeling, of course, is that step 2 is going to take on much more importance. This year may be a transition year where we don't see all of that because of just how many people are in different situations. But we'll see after this year what happens, and I think it'll be very interesting. But hopefully, my hope for this year is that there will be more holistic view of applications.
Absolutely. Additionally, I did want to mention that we have a YouTube video podcast for the step 1 moving to pass fail. So if you'd like, I will drop that in the chat. Moving on to our next question, it is a very popular one as well. It is how to prepare for interviews.
Okay, so as somebody who wants to get off to an early start, that's a great question. Now, the first thing to remember is your interview, your residency interview, is in fact the most important criteria that programs will use to make their rank order list. Okay, so you can divide this whole process into 2 parts. So right now we're doing everything we can to get interviews. So that's first phase of this whole process. The second phase is we need to do everything we can to make the best possible impression so that we can get ranked as high as possible on the rank list. So as far as how to prepare for interviews, so most of you have the book, The Successful Match. Some of you may not have received it, but you will be shortly. So there are over 150 pages of detailed interview prep in that book. And so I would recommend using that as a starting point. Beyond that, we have additional resources. So at our website, thesuccessfulmatch.com, we have a number of blog posts on issues related to residency interviews. In fact, one of our blog posts is on, a list of hundreds of questions that you could possibly be asked in a residency interview, but it's categorized in groups. And the reason we've categorized it in groups is so you can recognize similarities in questions. So when you're preparing for a certain question, you can recognize when you're asked something that sounds different, that it's actually just a variation of that same question. So we have a lot of useful blog posts related to the residency interview at our website, thesuccessfulmatch.com. On our Success in Medicine podcast, we have devoted entire episodes to different aspects of residency interviewing. So that's something that you also want to check out. We have some videos on that website as well about how to answer certain questions. We also have a residency interview course at thesuccessfulmatch.com. So there's a lot of different resources. I want you all to stick with us in these webinars, because in the webinars that we're going to be doing in September, October, November, we're going to hit interviews a lot harder, and we're going to go into some more depth so that we can get you feeling good about those interviews that will start often as early as October, occasionally in September.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited for the upcoming webinars about interviews and how to prepare. For the next question we have 3 more questions. So this is one of the 3. It is it worth applying to programs that sponsor J1s but have a 0 to 1% non-US IMG percentage?
So that really depends on, again, your individual situation. So some people, as they're making a list of the residency programs where they're going to apply to, they may have some sort of cutoff related to different program criteria. Like, so for example, if they don't meet the YOG criteria, they might decide that's a program they're not going to apply to. Or if they look at the resident roster and there's too few IMGs, and again, every IMG is going to define what's too few in a different way, they may decide, you know what, that's not a program that I'm going to apply to. Or if they look at their profile and they see that multiple factors in their profile don't exactly fit with that program. So again, there's lots of things that people are utilizing to decide whether or not to apply to a program. Because after all, the more programs you apply to, the greater your expense associated with it. Now, some people are not so concerned about expense. They look at it as, you know what, I'm just going to apply everywhere. That's going to be my strategy. Now, as far as, whether to apply to a program that has very few IMGs, it's really dependent upon that program, right? So if you can learn about the IMGs that are there and what their profile is, and increasingly that's more possible because of the internet, then you can get a sense of how your profile fits with the small numbers of people that are there. So if they're a visa offering and it's a visa that you are eligible for, you can try to get a better understanding of those residents that are there to see how your profile fits with them, and you can factor that into your decision. You can also reach out to those residents as well. Again, getting the information directly from people in the know, that is really gold. And if you can do that, it can be very, very enlightening.
Absolutely, Dr. Desai. I think that's a great point that getting the information right from the source can definitely be helpful. Moving on to our next question, we have, should I address not matching last cycle on my personal statement?
So some of you may be applying for a second time. And this is a question that we hear a lot. Should I divulge the fact that I have applied in the past? And from my standpoint, we don't often recommend divulging that fact, because what's more important is to ask yourself what prevented you from matching in the last cycle. What were the obstacles in the way of you, getting more interviews? Because once you can identify that, then you can take steps in your application to address those factors. Okay, so sometimes it means, getting more US clinical experience, or taking your step 3, or transforming your application. Perhaps your ARAS descriptions were not as strong as they could have been, or perhaps your personal statement was lacking in some way. So having a strong analysis of what held you back allows you to be a different applicant the second time around. And so we generally advocate that you work towards strengthening your profile wherever you can. Now, sometimes the reasons that limit you from getting interviews or matching have to do with red flags in your background, right? So these are areas of concern that programs see that make them hesitate to interview you. And so that is also something that can be addressed in the application. For example, some applicants who have red flags may not address them at all in the applications. For example, if you have a gap, or maybe you have a very low step score or an attempt, we see a lot of applicants who apply who don't address those things. And that may be problematic, because that can affect the number of interviews that you get. So if you do have a red flag, quite often addressing those things is crucial in an application. Now, if any of you are in that situation, I want you to reach out to me. We usually talk about those things on the one-on-one calls. But if there's something that is really worrying you, you're not sure how to handle it, you're not sure what effect it's going to have, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You have my number. You can reach out to me, not just during this rotation, but well after this rotation. We can always talk. We can talk about your specific situation, because to some extent, I'm giving you general advice, because each situation when you have a red flag is very different. But I'm happy to talk to any of you if that's something that's pressing on your mind.
Okay, on to our final question from the Google form questions. We do have some questions from tonight that were in the chat. We will try to get to those if we do have time at the end. So on to the final question. It is, does having a higher step 3 score than step 2 matter in terms of getting interviews for someone with a failed step 1?
Right. So step 3 traditionally has been something that's been recommended for several types of applicants. So first group of applicants, which would consider taking step 3, are people who want to be considered for an H-1B visa. A second group of applicants that should consider taking step 3 are those with a history of lower scores. So if you have an attempt, you want to show programs that you've grown from that attempt, right? Something or things happened that did not allow you to show your true abilities with the exam, and you have that attempt, but then you'd like to be able to point to evidence, right, that you've got past it. You learned something from that attempt, you took some action, and you have some different results to show. Now, that could be with the next step exam. So if it was step 1 hiccup that you had, if you're able to turn that around on your step 2, again, that's a form of evidence that you're providing. Step 3 would be another piece of evidence to establish that. And what you're trying to do essentially is to reassure programs that whatever happened with your attempt isn't something that they should be so concerned about, that it's not going to be something that follows you through to residency. So taking step 3, if you have a history of an attempt and passing that exam, provides that evidence that programs are looking for.
Absolutely. So that is it for the Google Form questions. Did we want to take some time to answer some of the questions we received tonight, Dr. Desai?
Yes, let's try to tackle a few of them before
Okay,
we wrap up.
absolutely. So starting off with our first question, we have, I finished my step 1 before pass fail, and my transcript still has the score on it. Will it have an edge compared with those who have it?
So the answer is that it depends on the program's philosophy. So again, this year we're at a transition point. We have some applicants who have step 1 scores in a numerical, there's a number to their score, and other people who have pass fail. So exactly how programs are going to look at those step 1 scores, it's going to be very program dependent. What we do know from surveys of program directors in different specialties asking about how they might change the way in which they select residents for interviews and rank them is we know that the step 2 is going to take on more importance. But just how step 1 is going to be factored into this entire equation, given that not all applicants have a numerical score, that part is very unclear. And as you probably have noticed from your review of program websites, there isn't a whole lot of transparency related to that.
Absolutely. So moving on to our next question, we have, this is a follow-up question about fellowships. This question is, what is the impact of the step 3 score for competitive fellowships in internal medicine?
So as you get further into your career, so now you become a resident and you are looking towards fellowship, step scores start to take on less importance. It's not to say that they are not important, they're still a factor, but other things become more heavily weighted. Letters of recommendation, in particular, are very, very important to fellowship programs. And that includes your program director letter of recommendation, as well as your subspecialty faculty letters of recommendation. Those are very, very important to subspecialty programs, as are other factors, including the marks you've made on that subspecialty through the involvement that you've taken during your residency. So, for example, if you've gotten involved in research, your interest in research and your ability to follow a project all the way through from beginning to end as a resident and get that project published or presented, that means a lot to fellowship programs. And so, one of the things you want to do when you get into residency is become productive, get involved in research, and work with dedicated mentors who have a track record of supervising residents and helping them move their projects forward. The biggest barriers to doing research in residency have to do with time and a lack of effective mentorship. So one of the things, getting back to that other question that we were asked about what should you be looking for when you're looking at programs or interested in a fellowship, is again, goes back to the people. Are there strong mentors there? Do they know how to get research done? And if they do know how to get research done, are they able to help their residents become productive? Because time is a big barrier, effective mentorship is a big barrier. And that mentorship is crucial because, yes, there are some residents who start residency and they know how to get research done because they have a rich history of doing research. But a lot of people need that guidance, and that is something crucial to ascertain about the faculty at that residency program you're considering. So to come back to that original questions, the STEP exams are still a factor, but they start to carry less importance, and that includes step 3.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. So the final question of the night is, I plan to apply for categorical IM and another advanced specialty that needs a prelim in medicine or surgery. Can you give me some insight on how to approach my ERAS application with categorical IM as my first preference? Additionally, do I need a separate LOR for preliminary year IM positions as well?
Okay, let's take that piece by piece. You wanted to ask the first part of the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first part of the question is that they're planning to apply for categorical IM and another advanced specialty that they need a prelim in medicine or surgery for. And the question is, can you give some insight on how to approach the MyERAS application with categorical IM as their first preference?
Well, anytime you're applying to multiple specialties, it does limit you to some extent on how you can craft your ERAS application. So the ERAS application, every aspect of it is important. It's important in its entirety. But one very important part of the ERAS application has to do with your description fields. So you have an opportunity to describe each experience you've been involved in, and you only have so much space for it. The ideal situation is when you're applying to a single specialty, because you can make that ERAS description specialty specific, meaning you can use words and phrases and language that appeals to a particular specialty. But when you're applying to multiple specialties, you are limited in your ability to do that. Okay, and that does present you a challenge. Now, of course, when you write your personal statement, you're not going to be limited in that sense, because the only personal statement you're going to be sending to the program is that one that's specialty specific. But the ERAS application, because you can't create different ERAS applications for different specialties, so that's a limitation of the current system. So that's going to be part of the challenge related to applying to multiple specialties. So, Alyssa, was there a second part to that question?
Yeah. So the second part of the question is, do I need a separate LOR for preliminary year IM positions?
So you don't need a separate LOR for a preliminary IM. If you're applying for preliminary IM and categorical IM, it's not necessary to have separate LORs. It's not crucial to indicate that you are applying for one or the other. Because in this particular instance, you want to be considered for both preliminary position and a categorical position. And so with that being the case, since the preliminary position is going to fulfill your base year for your advanced specialty, and you're also applying to categorical IM, it's not necessary to have two separate letters for both categorical and preliminary.
Thank you for answering that question, Dr. Desai. That is it for our questions for the night. So if you wanted to go ahead and give some final remarks.
Absolutely. These are all great questions. I thank you all for submitting those questions to us. I want to end by talking about something that's really, really important. It's something that I worry about at this time of the year. We're here in August. I find that August and September are two of the hardest months for residency applicants. It doesn't matter whether you're a US student or an IMG. There's just a lot going on right now in August and certainly in September. If you think about what you all are doing, you may be getting ready for a step exam, you may be doing a rotation, you may be working hard to earn a strong letter of recommendation, you may be working with your medical school to get an MSPE or a chairman's letter. There is so much going on. It feels like there's not enough time in the day to get things done. And due to all of that, there's a lot of stress associated with this time of the year. And so for all of you, I just want you to, take stock of where you're at and how you're feeling, because I've encountered a lot of students who are highly stressed at this time of the year, and understandably so. And I just want, your health to be the best that it could be. And so we all know that in medicine, stress is unavoidable, but we have to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to manage that stress? And so I want all of you to think a little bit about what are the things that replenish or restore you, and make sure that you're carving out a bit of time every day to take part of those things, because your well-being is so important. You've got this incredible future ahead of you. This is a stressful time, but the things that you do now are going to be the things that follow you through your career. So whatever it is that helps you cope, helps you manage your stress, rejuvenates you, make sure that you're doing those things, because that will help you manage the ups and downs of this residency selection process, and also set you up for a great career in medicine. So I do want you to think about that. I also want you to think about the people in your lives, your friends who are going through what you're going through, your colleagues, your acquaintances, as you go about your business, whether you're doing a rotation or whether you're studying for an exam with a group of people. If you sense that somebody's not doing well, take a moment to see what you can do to help them. Sometimes just a few words or a little bit of actions on your part can change things for the people around you. And again, if you are feeling that stress, you have people in your lives, right, that you can turn to. And I want to make sure that you keep up with those people. And of course, you can always turn to us here at MD2B Connect. I'm always available to you. And if you're feeling that stress, I'm happy to talk to you and give you the benefit of my experience. So please take care of yourselves and know that we are available to you. We are rooting for your success, and don't hesitate to reach out. Alyssa, any final words?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say that, here at MD2B Connect, we sincerely care about all of you and everybody who works with us. We just want you guys to know that, we're here to support you through this entire journey. And, we want to hear from you, and we want to help you. So please, if you guys have any questions, you just need to talk about something, please feel free to message anybody or email any of us on our team. I know that a lot of you work very closely with our Director of Client Services, Dan Morris, so you're always welcome to reach out to him as well. I'm always welcome to answering any of your questions, so I just wanted to put that out there as well. In conclusion, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for joining and staying with us tonight. Definitely keep in touch in the future for these webinars, as we're really excited to be able to do some interview prep. So I just wanted to restate, this will be a recurring monthly webinar, and we are very excited to have you guys with us. So thank you all for being here tonight, and we hope that you guys enjoyed the webinar.
Take care, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Have a great night.